There are no operational officers on the Central Military Commission, which means the chain of command of the military has been severed. It's been severed for the first time in the history of the People's Republic. So you have basically Xi Jinping just purging general and admiral, one right after the other.
That may bring us to these articles, a series of articles in the New York Times, and this story has been covered elsewhere as well about the quote unquote disappearing generals. As I mentioned, these high-ranking officials that seem to mysteriously disappear. I'm going to read a little bit from the New York Times here. This is a quote: "These men are among dozens of once rising senior military officers who have been detained, dismissed, or simply disappeared from view without explanation over the last 4 years." It goes on to write, "The purge has stripped the military of its most experienced commanders and raised doubts about its readiness to go to war, including over Taiwan, which Beijing claims as its territory." Let's stop there because that's taking us a couple steps. First of all, what's going on? Where detained, dismissed, or simply disappeared? Why, Gordon?
Just to give you an example of how serious this is, on January 24th, the Ministry of National Defense announced the investigation of two officers. One of them was China's most senior uniformed officer, General Zhang Yaoshao, who was also the first vice chairman of the Communist Party's Central Military Commission. The Communist Party Central Military Commission controls the military. It had 7 members on it. It now has two. It has Xi Jinping, who is not a military officer, and it has a political commissar. There are no operational officers on the Central Military Commission, which means the chain of command of the military has been severed. It's been severed for the first time in the history of the People's Republic. So you have basically Xi Jinping just purging general and admiral, one right after the other, for more than a decade, and it has completely disabled the Chinese military. Well, I shouldn't say completely, but it has made it to the point where it can't, for instance, launch hostilities by invading the main island of Taiwan because there's just nobody there to implement those orders.
Why would President Xi want to do that? Why not? I mean, okay, you agree with someone, you don't think they're following the same philosophy as you can move them out, but then you can move somebody else in. So what's going on?
Great question, to which there is no answer. Well, a couple things. We know that Xi Jinping wants loyalty, and he's made that the primary test of promotion. Um, and so people say that because Xi Jinping got rid of General Zhang Yaoshao, for instance, that he has complete control over the Chinese military. Well, no, he doesn't, because if he did, he wouldn't have to keep on purging people, because people are showing disobedience or in some way angering Xi Jinping, which means he doesn't control the military, because it just keeps on getting out beyond his control. This is important because it's not just a question of loyalty. There are rumors, and this is the part where we just do not know. But there have been rumors of attempted coups inside China. Now, I tend to think that they are not true, but they are persistent, which means that at the very minimum, people are trying to destabilize Xi Jinping. So we know that there is discord at the top of the Chinese military. And by the way, there's also discord at the top of the civilian leadership of the Communist Party as well. So this is a regime that is in turmoil. And so Xi Jinping, I guess the answer to your question, why is he doing this? Because he demands loyalty and he thinks it's more important than anything else, including having a capable military. Because China's military, its pilots are still as good as they were 2 months ago. Its ship drivers, they're still as good as they were, but they're not. There's no command. There's no command structure left.
What do you think this means for America?
Couple things. First of all, it means we can do what we want for at least a little while, because we know that the Chinese are not in a position to challenge us. That was also we sort of knew that even before the most recent purges. It also means Taiwan is safe from certain threats. As I mentioned, it is unlikely, really unlikely, that China will launch hostilities with an invasion of the main island of Taiwan. The reason is To do that, that's a combined air, land, sea operation, something that China has never done in its history. And to do that, Xi Jinping would have to give some flag officer, some general or admiral, almost complete control over the Chinese military. Even in his most secure days, Xi Jinping wouldn't want to do that because that makes that flag officer the most powerful figure in China. And and the Chinese civilian leaders do not trust the military, and they haven't since basically 3 decades. So Xi Jinping isn't going to do that. Um, but that's not to say Taiwan is safe because there are certain islands of Taiwan that are like 3 miles off the Chinese coast. China, even with its weakened state, can grab those islands, and Xi Jinping has an incentive to do that. The more important reason why we're at risk, and I think the risk of war is high, is because Xi Jinping, I believe, thinks that it's in his interest to maintain a high degree of tension. And because of that, we see very provocative Chinese military activities from India in the south to South Korea in the north. The most provocative are those against the Philippines in the South China Sea at places like Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal. If any one of those incidents spirals out of control, I don't think Xi Jinping can de-escalate. I don't think he can act constructively, and I think that that is a trigger for a wider war. Now, that wider war is going to involve us. Philippines, we have we have an obligation to defend them. We have a treaty. We have a treaty to defend Japan. We have a treaty to defend South Korea. And we have a moral obligation and a lot of practical reasons to defend Taiwan. So we get involved, our allies get involved, our friends get involved, and on the other side, the Chinese bring in the Russians and the North Koreans. So this could be one really big dust up.
Can you describe the provocative actions that you mentioned? Is it through air? Someone flying a little bit too close to certain airspace? Is it ships that are moving too close to certain areas? What is the provocative action that the Chinese military is taking?
Both of those. So, for instance, we see the Chinese ramming Philippine craft at Scarborough Shoal. And about 3, 4 months ago, the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy were chasing the Philippine Coast Guard. And the Chinese Seamanship, a Chinese destroyer, sliced off the bow of a Chinese Coast Guard cutter as they were pursuing a very clever and very nimble captain of the Philippine Coast Guard. At least 4 Chinese Coast Guardmen were killed, maybe more. And it just shows you that the Chinese military and the Chinese Coast Guard, although they look formidable and they've got great boats and ships, their seamanship, not very good.
Yeah.
So now the Chinese were furious at the Filipinos for this, though they should have been furious at themselves. The Chinese then ramped up their provocative activities at Scarborough. And so you have all sorts of things. But you also have unsafe aerial intercepts. So it's like all of the above. And we have made it a point to de-escalate when we can. And we did, for instance, in 2001, April 1st, when the Chinese fighter clipped the wing of our Navy EP-3. The Chinese fighter dumped into the sea and the pilot was lost. Our plane landed in Hainan. The Chinese stripped that plane. They imprisoned the crew. They demanded a ransom. George W. Bush, to his internal, this was a disgraceful episode in American history.